My brother mocked me in front of 200 people at our grandfather's funeral, called me a joke, called me pathetic for even showing up. And less than an hour later, the lawyer stood in front of that same room, opened the will, and said my name before he said anyone else's, including my brother's, including my mother's, including his own. If you've ever been the one who got laughed at for showing up, for caring, for trying, stay with me until the end. Because what happened in that room changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and I think you'll want to hear all of it. My name is Renee. I was 30 years old the year my grandfather Solomon passed away, working as a home hospice nurse and living in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The kind of place my brother Terrence never let me forget wasn't exactly impressive by his standards. Terrence was 34, ran his own logistics company, and had a habit of mentioning his net worth in casual conversation the way other people mention the weather. My mother, Yvonne, adored him for it, the way she'd always adored him, ever since we were kids, and he was the one who got the trophies, and I was the one who got told to try harder next time, even when I'd already tried as hard as I possibly could. I wasn't close to my mother, not really, and I wasn't close to Terrence either. But I was close to my grandfather Solomon in a way that felt like it belonged only to the two of us, untouched by whatever competition my mother had accidentally created between her children. Grandpa Solomon had built furniture for over 40 years, first in a small shop behind his house and later in a modest workshop he rented downtown, crafting tables and cabinets and bookshelves that people in 3 different states had in their homes without knowing the man who'd made them by hand. He never charged what his work was actually worth. He said a fair price mattered more to him than a big one, and he lived by that principle so consistently that most people assumed he was barely getting by, when in reality he'd been quietly investing what he saved for over 3 decades. Every Saturday morning, for as long as I can remember, I drove out to his workshop and sat on an overturned crate while he worked, sanding, sawing, staining, and we talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when the conversation isn't really the point, the company is. He never once asked why I hadn't become something more impressive. He asked how my patients were doing, whether I was taking care of myself while I spent my days taking care of everyone else, whether I was happy. A question my own mother had somehow never once asked me in 30 years. When he got sick, a fast-moving cancer that the doctors caught later than any of us wanted to hear, I was the one who rearranged my entire schedule to be there. I used my hospice training to manage his pain medication at home during the months he refused hospital care, insisting he wanted to die in his own workshop if it came to that, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and varnish instead of antiseptic and fluorescent lighting. My mother visited when it was convenient, usually on weekends, usually for less than an hour, usually spending most of that hour on her phone in his kitchen while I sat with him in the next room. Terrence visited exactly twice in the 4 months between diagnosis and death, both times for less than 15 minutes, both times bringing up his business, his investments, his plans for expansion, as if my dying grandfather needed an update on quarterly projections more than he needed someone to simply sit with him. "You're the one who's actually here, Renee," he told me one afternoon, his voice weaker than it used to be but his eyes just as sharp as they'd always been, watching me measure out his medication with the same careful attention he used to watch himself measuring wood. "Your mother comes when it's easy. Terrence comes when he wants to talk about himself. But you just show up every single time without me even having to ask." I told him that was because he'd never once made me feel like I needed to earn his time, unlike everyone else in our family, and he laughed at that, a real laugh that turned into a cough but stayed a laugh underneath it, telling me I'd always been the sharpest one in the family, even if nobody else had ever bothered to notice. He passed away on a quiet Thursday evening in his own bed, in the small house behind the workshop where he'd lived for over 30 years, with me sitting beside him holding his hand, the same way I'd held it through nearly every appointment, every hard night, every moment the rest of my family had somehow found a reason to miss. I called my mother from his bedroom, my voice breaking apart with every word, and she answered sounding distracted. Like I'd interrupted something more important, and told me she'd handle notifying everyone else, which mostly meant she told Terrence, and Terrence told nobody, because apparently the news didn't reach half our extended family until the day of the funeral itself. The funeral was arranged at a large church downtown, the kind with a full choir and a reception hall attached, far grander than anything my grandfather would have wanted for himself. A man who built furniture for people he'd never charge full price and lived in a modest house behind his own workshop his entire life. My mother insisted on the venue, said it needed to properly reflect the family's standing in the community, a phrase that made something in my chest tighten every time I thought about it, because Grandpa Solomon had never once cared about the family's standing in anything. I arrived early, wanting a few quiet minutes before the crowd showed up, and instead I found my mother and Terrence already there near the casket, surrounded by a small cluster of relatives and family friends, Terrence holding court in the particular way he always did, telling a story about the workshop, about how close he and Grandpa had been, a version of their relationship so far removed from reality I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. The service itself was long, filled with tributes from people who'd known my grandfather for decades, stories about his craftsmanship, his generosity, his quiet humor. My mother gave a eulogy about family bonds that made my jaw tighten with every sentence, considering how rarely she'd actually shown up during his final months. Terrence didn't speak formally, but during the reception afterward, standing near the dessert table with a small crowd of relatives listening. He found me across the room and decided, apparently, that the moment called for a joke at my expense. "Everybody, this is my sister Renee," he said, loud enough that the surrounding conversations quieted to listen, his tone light and mocking in the particular way that lets a person deny cruelty while absolutely intending it. She spent the last 4 months basically living at Grandpa's place, playing nurse, probably hoping something would rub off on her financially. Real touching stuff, right? Very dedicated. He laughed, and a few people laughed with him, uncertain but polite, the way people do when they're not sure if something is actually funny or just uncomfortable. I felt my face go hot, the particular kind of heat that comes right before tears you're determined not to let fall in front of an entire room of people. "I was there because he was dying, Terrence," I said quietly, my voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. "Not because I wanted anything from him." "Sure," he said, still smiling, still performing for the small audience gathered around the dessert table. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, sis. Some of us actually built something with our lives instead of playing caretaker for a paycheck that was never coming anyway." I didn't respond. I couldn't find words that wouldn't come out as either tears or something worse, so I simply walked away, found a quiet corner of the reception hall, and stood there alone until my mother eventually found me, not to comfort me, but to tell me I was being oversensitive, that Terrence was just being Terrence, that I shouldn't make a scene at a funeral over a little teasing. About 40 minutes later, a lawyer named Mr. Whitmore arrived, carrying a briefcase, and I watched my mother's entire demeanor shift the moment she noticed him crossing the reception hall toward the small side room set aside for family business. She gathered everyone quickly, ushering the immediate family into that room, Terrence trailing behind, still looking pleased with himself, still occasionally glancing my way with a small, satisfied smirk. If you're watching this and you've ever been mocked by your own family for simply caring more than they did, drop a heart in the comments before we go any further, because what happens next is exactly the kind of moment that makes all of it worth it. I almost didn't go into that room. Part of me wanted to leave entirely, to walk out of that church and drive straight home and let my family have their meeting without me sitting there absorbing more of Terrence's commentary. But something kept me rooted in place, some quiet certainty I couldn't fully explain, and I followed the rest of them into that side room and took a seat near the back. "Before I begin, Mr. Whitmore said, settling into a chair at the head of the table, opening his briefcase with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. "I need to explain that Solomon revised his estate plan roughly a year ago, and he specifically requested that I read a personal letter as part of this proceeding, exactly as written, without any omissions." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from a plain envelope, and the room went quiet. The earlier tension of Terrence's jokes and my mother's dismissiveness suddenly replaced by something more uncertain. "To my family, Mr. Whitmore Reed," his voice steady. "If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and there are things I want said plainly because I spent too much of my life saying things quietly, and I don't want to make that mistake one final time." He paused, glancing around the room. "I built furniture for 40 years because I believed something made with care and attention lasts longer than something made quickly for profit. I've come to believe the same thing is true of relationships. The people who showed up for me consistently, patiently, without asking for anything in return are the people whose care will last. The rest, I understand now, was mostly performance, and performances don't last very long once the audience stops watching." My mother's hand tightened around the arm of her chair. Terrence's smirk had finally started to fade. "Yvonne," the letter continued, addressing my mother directly, "you visited on your own schedule for your own convenience, and I understood that even as it disappointed me more than I ever said out loud. I want you to know I noticed the difference between visiting because you loved me and visiting because it was expected of you." My mother's face had gone rigid. "Terrence." The letter went on, and I watched my brother's confident posture stiffen completely. "You visited twice in 4 months, and both times you spent most of your visit discussing your business rather than asking how I was actually feeling. I raised you to build things that last. I'm not certain you understood the relationships in your life needed the same patience and care you put into your company." Terrence said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed somewhere on the table in front of him. "There is one person who sat with me nearly every single day during the final months of my life, Mr. Whitmore Reed," his voice softening, "who managed my medication with more skill and patience than most of the professionals I encountered, who never once asked me about money, who simply wanted to be present for whatever time I had left." He looked up from the letter, and his eyes found mine across the room. "That person is my granddaughter, Renee." The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. My mother's mouth opened slightly. Terrence stared at the table like the wood grain had suddenly become the most important thing he'd ever seen. "Renee, if you're listening, I want the first thing you hear from this room to be your own name, spoken clearly and without hesitation, because I don't think you've heard that enough in your life, being seen first, being named first, being chosen first. Today you are." I felt tears building, and this time I didn't try to stop them. "For that reason, Mr. Whitmore continued, Solomon has left the workshop, the equipment, the property it sits on, and the majority of his investment accounts, valued altogether at just over $2 million, entirely to his granddaughter, Renee. The number settled over that room like something physical. To my daughter Yvonne and my grandson Terrence, I leave $50,000 each. Along with my hope that you eventually learn what my granddaughter already understands, that showing up consistently is worth more than showing off occasionally." Mr. Whitmore folded the letter and set it down gently. "This can't be right," my mother said, standing up abruptly. He was on pain medication for months. He wasn't thinking clearly. 2 independent physicians confirmed his full mental capacity at the time these changes were finalized, Mr. Whitmore replied calmly. "The evaluations are included in the estate file." "This is ridiculous," Terrence snapped, finally finding his voice. "She gets everything because she played nurse for a few months. I'm his actual grandson. You mocked me in front of 200 people an hour ago, I said quietly, and it was the first thing I'd said since the letter began. For showing up, for caring. Where were you the other 3.5 months, Terrence? He had no answer. And everyone in that room knew it. You don't get to stand there and act wounded. I continued, feeling something inside me finally break loose after years of being the one who tried harder and got noticed less. None of you sat with him. None of you learned his medication schedule. None of you gave up a single evening for him without complaint, and now you want to act like something was stolen from you. My mother sat back down slowly, her face pale. Saying nothing further, Terrence's expression had shifted from anger into something closer to shame, though he still refused to look directly at me. Mr. Whitmore mentioned the will's no contest clause calmly, explaining that any challenge would forfeit whatever remained on the table, and the room absorbed that information in heavy silence, anger quietly recalculating itself against consequence. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't feel triumphant, not really. I felt exhausted and sad and strangely hollow, the way truth often feels once it's finally spoken aloud in a room that spent years avoiding it. I don't want a war over this, I said, looking around at faces that had once felt like family. He didn't leave me this to punish anyone. He left it to me because I was there. I'm not going to make this uglier than it already is. Nobody responded to that. I left the church that evening and drove straight to the workshop, sitting on the same overturned crate I'd sat on every Saturday morning for years, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and varnish, and I let myself cry properly for the first time since he died. In the weeks that followed, my family mostly went quiet. Terrence never apologized for the funeral, but he also never mocked me again. Something that felt less like reconciliation and more like the absence of an audience worth performing for. My mother sent one message calling me manipulative, which I didn't respond to because I was finally too tired to keep explaining myself to people who'd already decided not to listen. I kept the workshop running, hired 2 young apprentices Grandpa Solomon had been mentoring before he got sick, and some evenings I still sit on that same overturned crate, surrounded by unfinished furniture, thinking about a man who spent 40 years building things meant to last, and who made sure in the end that the truth about who actually showed up would last too. So I'll leave you with this question, the same one I still think about most nights. If you'd been mocked in front of an entire room for simply caring more than everyone else, would you have stayed silent the way I almost did, or would you have said something? And if the truth eventually came out anyway, the way it did for me, would it have felt like justice, or would it just feel like a sadness that arrived far too late to matter the way it should have?